All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and kick this session off. This is Illini Aero Connections. We're going to be talking about disruptors to the traditional aerospace industry. Thank you all for joining us. It's about 5 o'clock in the evening here in Illinois. So I don't know what time that makes it for you, wherever you're joining us from, but we do thank you and want to welcome you. So we have a great panel tonight. We have 4 alumni connecting from all over the world here to talk about their experience in the aerospace industry. To start us off is Samantha McCue. Samantha is a 2012 alum of the department and has helped develop this series for us. So Samantha, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, perfect. So welcome everybody. Today's kind of an interesting session. This is really more of a discussion, and it's an exciting one because I think as we're, many of us are aware, the industry has continued to change, kind of more and more rapidly, and it's an exciting time to be in aerospace. I think sometimes, parents' generation, grandparents, kind of coming off the war era of aerospace, you worked for a couple companies or the government, and that's kind of what it was. Nowadays, you can work in a very small company, like very tech startup feeling, or a tech startup all the way to the bigs, and everyone's doing very different, cool stuff, and it's moving very, very fast. So this is a kind of a cool opportunity to talk with some alums who work in the space, both on the the spacecraft side and the aircraft side, that are part of these kind of what we'll call new space or disruptor type companies and technologies. And I'm just going to kick it off by starting with our panelists and letting them give a little brief bio about themselves. And Jay, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Samantha. So my name is Jay Thomas. I think some of you know me. I graduated in 2000 and I stayed around for my master's in 2002. And a couple years later, I worked for what was then a very small company called SpaceX. And when I started, it was less than 100 employees. When I left, it was 1,000, and then obviously now it's 10,000 plus. And when I was there, I had a chance to do a lot of stuff because I was an early employee who wrote much of the initial software stack for SpaceX. So I got to touch all the little pieces of the rocket and see how it all fit together, and it was a great and exciting experience. I like to talk about it when I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. My name is Courtney Leverenz, and I am a product safety and mission assurance at Virgin Galactic, and I specialize a lot in system safety and human factors. I serve in this role kind of as a jack of all trades, and I graduated with my bachelor's in 2021. While I was here in school, I was a really active member in the Illinois Space Society, and as well as just the department at large. So just kind of getting started as more of a recent alumni on this panel here.
Awesome, Courtney. Hey everyone, Jannis Töpfer here, tuning in from Berlin, Germany right now. I'm currently the head of investments at Supernal. Supernal is part of the Hyundai Motor Group, but it's basically the endeavor of the brand who you probably all know as a car company to also become an aircraft OEM. So we're active in what's now known as the AAM space, so building flying taxis, flying cars, flying something, whatever you want to name it, but it's basically moving people in the urban and suburban environment, and we take the sort of automotive approach towards this. I graduated in 2014 with my master's in aerospace, actually stuck around for another year at the business school. And I've been at Supernal since the beginning of 2020, basically as employee number 5. So I guess I'm beating Jay on the early employee side, but we got to see how big Supernal grows. So obviously we're still pretty young. Hopefully at some point we'll be as big, but not yet.
All right, and my name is Nihar Ghandi. I am a guidance navigation controls engineer at Archer Aviation. So also kind of in the AAM space, similar to Supernal. We're building an eVTOL aircraft for urban air mobility transit. I graduated aerospace in 2012. I've spent time working at a bunch of different companies as big as, they get at Boeing, as well as several different startups, working on everything from drones to electric VTOL aircraft like I'm on right now. So yeah, definitely happy to talk about the differences between, you know, some of the bigger companies and some of the smaller companies I've worked at as well.
Awesome. Okay, so Jay, let's go back to you and talk a little bit about, I know you're in a different role now, but let's walk through kind of what a day in the life of Jay was like when you were at SpaceX. And I know that's going to be hard to do, but give us as good of a summary as you can. And then I'm curious how those skills or the things you were doing there, how that transitioned you into what you're doing now, if at all. How is that related?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yeah, so the thing about SpaceX, and I think this is still true to some extent, is SpaceX tends to be crisis driven. You know, everything is a goal about a specific crisis, and you have to get everything done at a particular time, because otherwise, you know, and at the time, otherwise we really believed the company would fail. And again, SpaceX went many times close to failure. So, you know, some days would be perfectly ordinary days where you just get up and go to work at, you know, 9 a.m. and be done at 5. And then other days, something blew up and you have to figure out how to fix it, or you get a call at, you know, 3 a.m. because something was happening at a test site that they needed some help with. So when you are at a early company, it's very unpredictable, because you know, the scale of the impact that you have at a company when, you know, you're in the first, you know, few batches of employees, you know, you're involved in everything. You know, your fingers are in everything, and whenever anything goes wrong, you know, people need your help to fix it. So there was certainly, now that being said, you know, as SpaceX, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that I struggled with at SpaceX was, and this kind of leads into what you were saying, what I really learned was I tried to do everything myself. And, you know, one of the things that I learned over the years is, you know, you've got to figure out how to split your job when it becomes too much for you. And you have to figure out how to, you know, find a good team to work with you to solve bigger problems. Because every company grows to the point that whatever you're assigned to do, you're no longer able to do it at some point.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jay. And then kind of for me, and Jay brought up a good point of you kind of have your fingers in everything. And that's especially with my role. Every day is a different day. Some days I'm investigating hazards related to our current fleet of ships that are flying. And then sometimes I'm talking to the FAA about our future fleet and kind of those license requirements that are going to go into it. And then some other days I'm kind of developing different documents to work through like some human factors implementations. We're really trying to develop that type of program. And to me, I love it, having my fingers in everything. Because I think if I did the same thing day in and day out, I would go a bit bananas. And it exposes me to so many different concepts and facets of the engineering and safety world. And what I mentioned earlier is I like to consider myself the jack of all trades, and it's helped me tremendously both inside and outside of work. So, and I love it. So, yeah. And then I'm going to hand it off to Jannis.
Yeah, great. So, because my perspective is a little bit different because I'm in a non-engineering role in that sense now, right? So as head of investments, I look at where do we deploy capital more concretely, where do we invest in companies that can then help us along the way. So I, work very closely with all of our engineers, but in that sense, I don't solve any hard engineering challenges. So it's a little different, but I think what I love about, my day-to-day is that I take a very macro perspective. And I always say I play technology puzzle on a daily basis, right? I talk to the engineers and I get basically the same requirements as everyone else, but instead of, sitting down and finding a technical solution, I'm looking at the same problem, but saying, okay, where are other smart people that might have looked at this, that might have solved this in some way? And where can I say technologies that maybe someone has developed for, to solve problem X, but apply it to problem Y, and then create value through that? And then how do we get access to that? So therefore, my day-to-day is actually talking to a lot of smart people that are probably smarter than myself, but I think you learn a lot from that, and it helps you grow, right? So that's also, one general advice is always surround you with people that are smarter than yourselves, because that usually elevates you too. Yeah, I think that's probably it for now. I mean, I guess besides that, day to day, it's actually, quite global role. So that's always the benefit. I think when you come to some of these non-engineering roles, but where you touch engineering with an engineering degree, because it allows you to very quickly, speak the engineering language. But if you also develop like the business acumen and all of that on the same, right, I think that's something that's becoming more and more valuable in the world, of really bridging these two sides. Because on the one hand, products and everything gets more technical. And I know that's crazy for aerospace, but yes, stuff gets even more technical. But on the other hand, right, there are less and less people, I feel like, that are able to synthesize all of this on like a high level. So to really, put this into very simple terms so that also other people can understand it. So, think about this sort of when, go your path and when you look at what you do next.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Day-to-day life in my role currently at Archer is maybe, like Jay said, pretty hard to describe. I think every day is really different. One of the things I actually really enjoy about working kind of at a startup at a smaller company. Our group is guidance, navigation, and controls, and we basically span the gamut of everything from flight control algorithms, flight software, simulation, and data analysis and data processing. So you can imagine that, maybe at a bigger company that might be 5 or 6 different teams, but that's all kind of brought together into one team. So one day I might be sitting there and thinking about the designs for what our flight controllers should look like on our production aircraft. The next day might be looking at analyzing some of the characteristics of the prototype aircraft that we're flying today. And the day after that, I might be going out to a flight test to support actually monitoring data in real time, getting back the next day and then analyzing that data, determining stability margins, and proving that we're good to continue our flight campaign. So really kind of having the opportunity to work at sort of a more disruptive company. One of the cool aspects is really being able to get involved with a lot of different aspects of engineering. And then even things a little bit beyond engineering. I know that being on a smaller team, you're just naturally closer to leadership at the company level and really closer to the mission and the vision of the company itself. So having more exposure to how day-to-day engineering decisions might have impacts on the actual, sustainment of the business. As Jay said, hey, in the early days of SpaceX, if we don't solve this problem, if we don't avert this crisis, like that could be the end of the company. Being actually, that kind of makes it very real, and really it allows you to feel that impact that you can make at a company. And I think it's a super interesting place to be in, and being able to make that impact, especially early in careers, is I think really valuable.
Perfect. So you guys talked a lot about what you love about your jobs. I'm interested in what's the most challenging part about your job, and specifically, like, what do you see as a big challenge for your technology or for your company? What are you up against in this space, that's this disruptor space that you're currently operating in?
Hey, Samantha, maybe I'll let some of the rest of the group go first, because they're more in the trenches than me.
Alrighty. Recently, kind of actually with one of my tasks has been developing a human factors program. I mentioned it in my introduction. And then with that kind of challenge is really to brainstorm how human error can play into failure. Human error can come at a variety of different points. It could be on the manufacturing, on the operator side, and humans are extremely complex. People think and react differently to different problems. And just, I think it can be translated industry-wide as new technologies are developing, coming out. They are going to run into this problem, and it's especially going into new territory. There just might not be a history of how to solve some of those issues. So that's kind of a little challenge I think that I'm just personally experiencing. And I think though it's given me a great learning opportunity to grow and hope that maybe we can solve the different way of how humans can operate in aerospace. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jannis.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. I think from the, my perspective, and I'll start sort of with the industry first. But for advanced air mobility, right, sort of everything in that sense is solvable right now, but so many things can be done so much better. And Nihar can probably, echo that. But like, if we would get better batteries, it would be great, right? If we would get, easier high-rate manufacturing of composites, right, at lower cost, it would be great. I mean, there are quite a lot of technical challenges. And I've done like assessment with our engineers, right? We sort of have come up with like 60 priority technologies. So I would say that the most challenging part about my job is actually, well, what do I want to tackle first, right? How does all this priority fits into this long-term development timeline that needs to be aligned, obviously, across the entire organization, and sort of also with that predicting how long is it going to take for certain technology challenges to solve, right? Is this 6 week, 6 month, 6 year, potentially several decade kind of problems, right? And if based on that, right, how do you address it, and how do you make sure that in the end it all comes together to create a new, completely new product in a market that doesn't exist? And I think that's very unique compared to a lot of these other things, because you don't really have history that you can go off, right? So yes, right, traditionally in aircraft it takes, I don't know, about 5 to 7 years, right? For smaller aircraft might be a little smaller, a little shorter, but like for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, there's literally no history, right? So everything is like uncharted territory, and trying to make sense of all this uncertainty is probably what keeps me up at night the most.
Yeah, uncertainty is definitely a huge part of the job and what we deal with every day. Definitely one of the biggest things that kind of influences and kind of makes our jobs challenging, I think. Definitely echoing what Jannis said. I mean, having a lot of different challenges at different timescales and understanding which ones are worth really focusing your energy on is really huge, even in the day-to-day kind of engineering work. I'd say that there's technical challenges for sure that haven't been solved before. Whereas if you're working on, maybe an airplane or a rocket, you generally have a pretty good understanding of, the physics behind what we're working on. And then it's kind of incremental progress. But when you're talking about like a new type of aircraft that's never been flown or certified before, it's really kind of open season and really figuring out where to spend spend most of our energy and how to make that most valuable impact. That's definitely a big part of it. I'd say another part of it that is challenging, especially working at a smaller company, is and maybe even more relevant to relatively new engineers, is not necessarily having someone to tell you how things are done or having defined processes. So in a lot of cases, we're moving quickly. Everything isn't always documented, and processes evolve daily. As people start learning new things, start learning that, some of the tools that worked with 20 employees doesn't work at a company with 200. And so those things have to change and adapt quickly. I think people who tend to do well are those who can be flexible and realize that, what worked for me 2 weeks ago maybe is not, maybe those assumptions that went into those decisions aren't valid anymore. So you can't just necessarily codify your processes and how you do your day-to-day work. Just kind of always being open to change. And then maybe the third part is dealing with what Jay kind of described earlier as like crisis mode. So having issues that come up that need to be solved very quickly, how to kind of refocus your attention, context switch, and be able to really, really solve problems that are kind of central to kind of the company's goals. I think that's probably the more stressful parts of your day. And when that happens, it can be really difficult, but also really rewarding when you are able to come up with solutions to solve really, really important problems.
Yeah, and if I could just speak to that for another moment, one of the things that I found challenging was lining up the interrupts with the long-running tasks. So you always have this crisis, you always have this problem that has to be solved tomorrow, but you also need to get ready for your next vehicle, your next mission, whatever you're going to be doing in a month or a year. And unless you're working on both of them at the same time, you're just creating bigger crises for yourselves.
Yeah, that's great, Jay. I know from my perspective, I work kind of in a disruptor space from a government unmanned system perspective. And I think I bang my head against the wall the most when I'm told that current government regulations don't know what to do with this new thing, right? And it's like, well, we can't certify this thing to fly because it doesn't meet all these criteria. And it's like, well, because it doesn't have all those things that those planes had. So I think pushing those government rules and regulations forward as the technology is evolving as an engineer for me is the most painful process, because they've done it that way for 100 years and they don't care that it's hard and that you can't do it the same way. So I guess I'm curious, for those of you that have had experience at other sort of, non-disruptor companies, if you could compare and contrast what that was like, maybe working for one of the bigger companies or somewhere, related to maybe government, civil service work. I'm not sure if anyone, I heard you mention Boeing, Nihar. I don't know who all has this, but I guess Jay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at a lot of places by now. So I've worked at the Aerospace Corp, Maxar, a bunch of tech companies. And now I work at a company that does flight safety software, basically software that tests the software in avionics. So I've been around this whole circle of aerospace a few times now, and I find it's not an either or, it's a both. I think you're going to find the most fulfillment in your career if you have the ability to switch between smaller and larger organizations. Find some small organizations, get your feet wet, learn, but also at other times of your life, feel free to go back into a traditional aerospace organization where, what's possible, what's not possible, how much time everything's going to take. And that the company isn't going to fail. So I think it's, new space versus traditional space. A lot of it is actually life cycle, in terms of your own personal life cycle and your own personal risks. And I don't think you should choose one or the other.
That's excellent points, Jay. And I'm actually going to pass it on to Jannis just to get more of an insight to old versus new.
Okay, yeah. So again, I've not really worked, for one of the more traditional aerospace companies, but I was in consulting for 4 years before, management consulting. So I had to put out a lot of these fires that I think actually come from this difference. And what I like the most, or what I see the big difference, is that this one sentence, basically, we have always done it this way, or, we have 30 years of experience. Doesn't really mean that much when you work for a smaller company, right? And I think in some sense that is something very refreshing, right? Because you can look at things in a new way. And sometimes it's actually very scary because you have no clue what you're actually doing or what you have to do. So it's a little bit kind of, again, around the uncertainty. It also goes very much in hand with what Samantha says, right? Like, if you don't know how to, certify something, what the regulation actually is, right? Everyone sort of reads it differently. And for a lot of the traditional companies, the answer or the default is usually, well, if we don't know, right, we'll kind of wait and see. And then the newer ones are the ones that say, well, we also don't know, but wait and see, it's boring. So we're going to, tear down some walls and see what we can do. And I think that you got to make a little bit, decide for yourself what type you are. I wouldn't say that necessarily, one is better than the other. I mean, by now everyone wants to work in tech, so there's somewhat of a predisposition towards tearing down the walls. But there is also lots of benefit in understanding on how to work the government system and how to work things at a certain pace, because a lot of times things actually do get executed faster than when you try, to do it completely different. So that's always a balance here that generally these companies need to strike, but also I think that, you guys need to strike as you figure out what your next moves are.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. I have some experience kind of on both sides of that, having worked at Boeing on the commercial airplanes, autopilot programs, as well as working at several much smaller companies, anywhere from 40 to about 200 employees. And so I'd say that I kind of agree with Jay in that there's different values and different things you can get out of working at smaller companies, as well as maybe more traditional aerospace companies. I actually really valued my time at Boeing as much as I really enjoy working at smaller companies and having that immediate kind of close impact with the company. It's also, I think I learned a lot about not just engineering, but also how a company works, how to really function in an organization. Having kind of well-bounded problems and well-skilled problems is something that is really helpful early in your career, where you're still trying to kind of get a grasp of what it really means to be an aerospace engineer in the industry. There's obviously a lot of different directions you can go, a lot of ways you can specialize. But I think having a little bit of a tighter scope, especially early in your careers, is really helpful to kind of help you grow and really understand what it means to be as an engineer in industry. I think then the other thing is I learned a lot about things that I potentially didn't know about myself and how I worked. I think experiencing both sides, you really learn what matters more to you as far as what you're looking for in your career, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, things you want to improve. And then also learning about different styles of organizations and understanding, do I want to be part of a big company where potentially the, outcome is something massive. It's right, a new airplane that's going to carry people for 30 years, or it's going to be, a new space system that could take us to Mars or something like that. Versus a company that's working on a newer, more disruptive technology, which may or may not ever see the light of day. That can be really stressful for some people, and it can kind of ruin the experience if you are always sort of wondering, hey, is my product ever going to make it out into the world? So I think there's definitely pros and cons to both. I definitely experienced a lot of mentoring at a bigger company that I found really hard to get at smaller companies, just because the pace is much quicker. It's hard to get people's kind of dedicated time for things like mentoring in career areas, even getting kind of dedicated career development advice. So you're kind of more on your own working at a more disruptive company. But you kind of have the trade-off where you do get to be much, much closer to solving problems and having that bigger impact.
So I'm curious, there's a lot going on in the industry right now, what you guys are most excited about, what you're looking forward to seeing happening in the near, maybe in long-term future in the aerospace industry.
So I got a funny start. When I was a senior in high school, I rode my bike someplace and my bike got run over. And the guy who ran over my bike, he drove it over with, there was a fish market, and he drove it over with the man from the fish market. And he was driving me home, and he said, "Oh, I have a degree in aerospace engineering, but I can't get a job anywhere." So, and then the next year I went to college, and things looked. This was in 96, and in the years afterwards, things looked quite a bit better for a while. And then in 2000, there was the .com crash, and things fell apart for a while, and then So I guess what I'm saying is, at the start of my career, new aerospace hardly existed. Aerospace itself was so cyclical. But I think what I find most heartening about all of the new investment in aerospace and all of the new organizations that are involved is that it creates this much bigger industry, this much broader set of places we can work and things we can do. And that is the most exciting thing to me, just that we have so many new problems to solve and contribute our engineering to solve them in creative ways.
That's awesome. I don't have a running over my bike story, and it hasn't been too much time since I've graduated. But I think I noticed the awareness and excitement of new aerospace in the general public. And it's really something I think is witnessed. I remember when I was in grade school, and it just was, yes, traditional companies are going to be your only path to the aerospace industry. And I've been very involved in volunteering for educational outreach, and I see how excited and aware these kids are of these new aerospace companies and what they're bringing to the world. And with that, they're seeing a place for themselves in the industry. They see where there's going to be opportunities to develop their own ideas in ways that not would have been possible, I think, beforehand. And it's amazing and exciting to see. And I'm really excited to have them as my future coworkers.
Yeah, Courtney, thanks for that. And to build on to that, I would start with saying there's probably not been a better time to be an aerospace engineer, probably since the time of the Wright brothers, because there's so many new things, right? People are so excited about so many ideas floating around. And by now, all these projects have basically moved out of what, I would call nerd territory, right? Like the faculty, for example, we've looked at all these things, for years and years and years, but now they're in the mainstream. And that makes it very, interesting, exciting, and that also pushes things forward. Right now, sometimes you hear people talk about some, new launch from SpaceX or some new aircraft or whatever, like on the subway, or people show videos. Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Which, like, again, in my lifetime hasn't really happened, and this is probably something that has changed back from even in the last, I guess, 7-8 years, right, since I graduated, where we were still more in this nerd territory as aerospace engineers, where now it's like one of the really cool things to do, and quite a lot of traction in industry. Like it's becoming one of these big industries. And personally, again, what I'm excited about, and that's why I love, working specifically in VTOLs, is if you look about flying, right? And I might fly to the moon, fly, a couple of, 100,000 feet or whatever in the air. I mean, in the sense, it's all flying, but I really love bringing flying to, the broader masses, but also to like lower altitudes, to make it even more accessible for more people. Because again, all of us probably love flying, right? Have done it a lot, but there's still a lot of people that don't, and especially don't use it regularly. So, continuing to cut down the price point and continuing to make it more accessible to people is, I think, something that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot to be excited about in the future of aerospace these days, from like an impact perspective. Really just working on technologies like electrification, is really, really exciting. I think it has a positive impact on society and the world at large, right? If we're able to cut down the emissions of transportation, obviously that has a huge impact on the entire world. But I think there's also a lot of excitement around just how much more digital the industry has gotten and is moving towards. When I started working, I remember one of the things that shocked me at Boeing was that a lot of new airplanes were still being built with paper drawings, and there was no 3D models, and that blew my mind. These days, companies wouldn't even think of using anything like that, where everything is, CAD first. We're able to have digital simulations of whether it's, structural simulations in FEM, CFD simulations of aerodynamics, really being able to design kind of the future of aerospace products, and being able to iterate without actually having to build hardware and test things. I think obviously real hardware and testing is super invaluable, but being able to do a lot of that learning and iteration in the digital space, I think is a huge game changer for the industry, and really kind of opens up the opportunity for us to try wilder ideas, to dream up new things, new forms of either transportation or, on the defense side, there's lots of things that are in development that we couldn't even dream of a few years ago. So from that perspective, especially companies that are sort of digital first, I think that's really exciting. Another aspect of it is, having not having everyone have to be in the same room at the same time, right? All of us obviously right now are on the Zoom meeting from all corners of the world. I think Jannis said he's in Berlin. So being able to bring together teams of international origin and just having all those different perspectives to build kind of the future of the industry, I think for me is super exciting. I know that personally on my team, I have people working in different countries, different states. And it's really something that, even just a few years ago was not something that could be imagined. I think that's one of the really exciting aspects of the industry going forward, is just having access to a lot more kind of talent, a lot more perspectives, and a lot more technology to kind of bring our ideas to life.
And you guys, some of you have already touched on this, but I'm curious, just from your perspective and what you've experienced thus far, what your advice would be to students who are, looking for full-time jobs, looking for internships, going to make their way into this new dynamic environment. Knowing what you know, if you were 22, 23, 24 years old, what would you want to tell yourself that they might not know right now?
I think you're on mute there, Jay.
Yeah, you saw my lips moving, huh? So yeah, I would say focus on what you love. I mean, I think this is a passion field. I think most people got into this field because they love flying, they love space. Find an organization that lets you that where their goals align with yours, and don't be afraid to throw yourself into it. You'll have tons in your life if you want to, throw yourself a little less into it. But especially when you're starting out, find something you can throw yourself into.
Well, thanks for that, Jay. My advice, and a couple of my friends are on here, and they probably will laugh when I say this, and I've lived by it, is don't be afraid to try new things. And it can differ by engineering discipline, size of the company, location, so on and so forth. In the internships, they're great because, while you can find what you like, I think more importantly, you're going to find maybe what you not as much enjoy. And to me, that was extremely valuable because I could narrow down my focus and what I wanted to do post-graduation, and then eventually too, maybe what I was interested in, so that I could dive deeper. So yeah, go out and try new things. You might like something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can only echo that. And to add to this, be aware that right now, and this is not so much advice that I would have liked to get, but I would have loved to be in that position, that right now there's such a talent shortage because there's so many new companies going up, that it's not so much for you about, where can I sort of get an internship, but it's more like, where do I want to go? Because you'll probably get an internship because everyone's hiring like crazy. So really think about, what do you want to do? As Jay said, right, where can you throw your heart into? And then pursue that. And I'm a big believer of always, right? Go in, at least in the beginning, with 110%. Probably can't sustain that forever, but go in, have fun, and then reevaluate when the time comes.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with that. I mean, I think there's lots of advantages to working at all types of different companies. And I think the most important thing, especially for kind of like a first job out of school, is really to just go in with an open mind and start learning. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to shape your career path. Once you've been at a company for a couple of years, you start to get a better idea of what it is you do and don't like. I think there's really no wrong place to start. There's going to be lots of opportunities to kind of learn what it is that you really enjoy. I agree totally that, looking for something that really interests you and kind of sparks your passion is the way to go. If you're able to find a company that you kind of align with. And then even just working on a specific team, obviously the specific team within a company can have a big difference in what you do and what your day-to-day life is like. So I would, definitely try to get a good idea of what a specific team is doing, what their impact is, what their work style is. There's a lot more, there are, even at some of the biggest companies, there are organizations that work fairly independently from kind of the big aerospace systems. So don't be afraid to, even if you are having your mindset on working in a smaller team or working at a startup, don't necessarily rule out some of the bigger companies. There are pockets within some of those organizations that can be really interesting as well. And on the flip side, if you are really have your eyes set on working at Boeing or Airbus or one of the big aerospace companies, maybe take a look at some of the smaller companies as well and see if there's anything that interests you. I think keeping your mind open and being flexible to making changes in the future is really the way to go. There's going to be, you're going to have several jobs. This is not, the 50s and 60s where you join a company and you spend your life working there and retire with a pension. There's a lot of career mobility, especially with remote jobs becoming a thing in 2022 and beyond. I think you'll have a lot of flexibility. So don't necessarily feel like this is going to define the rest of your career. Think of your first job as your entry into the industry, and kind of use that as an opportunity to learn and really figure out what the next steps and where your career direction will grow from.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. At this point, kind of given the time, I wanted to open it up to questions if anybody has them. It could be to one of our panelists or all of them if you have something you're interested in. You could either unmute or type it in the chat. And I'll ask the question first. Okay, good. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, no, go for it.
All right. So first of all, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. That was really valuable. And my question is, so like when there are so many companies around, like you were talking about small companies as well as big companies and how experience in each company can be different. But how would you differentiate between the impact a smaller company has on the aerospace industry in comparison with a bigger company?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with more find a place where you can find your own personal impact. In big companies and small companies, a lot of it is dependent on your team, your coworkers, your management, the people you interact with. So I think to echo what Nihar was saying is, a lot of this is effectively trial and error. Try out a company. Try to expect in the beginning of your career only to work for a place for a year or two. Try it out, see what your impact is, your personal impact on the organization, on the problem space, and then decide whether that's what you want to do and go from there.
And I guess to add to that, also take some time to talk to the people really that are trying to hire you or the team you're joining, because what Jay mentioned, right? Aerospace in particular, all these development projects have sort of moved, or I think are way more collaborative than they used to be, right? So you're really working closely with different people, from different backgrounds, from different specialties, from different parts of the organization. So it's sort of, as part of your process, and be that, just for an internship or for a full-time, do a little bit of your due diligence on the people, right? Maybe, if you have a chance, go grab a coffee with them and just see if that, works with you, if that chimes with you or not. And then, put that obviously into your assessment if you want to join, rather the larger company or the smaller company, because as the panelists have said, you can basically find everything in all the organizations, because also the big ones are obviously fully aware that there are all these, small, faster moving companies. So they have little pockets of trying to do the same thing. So really look at the people and not only, the name or the title or any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think as far as impact for both big, big legacy aerospace companies and smaller startups, I think they both have a significant impact on the industry. The smaller companies, the disruptors, they're the ones that try crazy ideas, that try things that, you know, have a high probability of failure and can tolerate that risk. But when those do succeed, they can completely transform the industry. SpaceX being a great example of that. But on the flip side, you know, it's the big companies that actually deliver real immediate value to the world. Like they're actually producing products today. They are building things, they're manufacturing, they're actually delivering products. So there's definitely an impact to be felt from both sides.
Agree with everything, pretty much echoing. It's a lot of personal reflection. I think not only what's the mission of the company, what's the end goal that you want, because it's your career. So I think that's the biggest thing, is to think really what you want to experience. So
Thank you.
Sorry, I just had a question. So I was wondering what the difference with team dynamics is with like the disruptor companies and like these larger companies like Lockheed and Boeing. If you guys could answer some of that.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, team dynamics is such an important part of, you know, your work, and in reality, in your work-life balance as well, because your team, you know, determine how good your team is and how well you work with them determines a lot. So there are pockets in every big company that mirror the dynamics of, you know, the disruptors, and in the same way, every disruptor has teams that take care of their legacy tech. So I think, you know, I think a lot of it is you have to dive into the people and their personalities. And, you know, taking, you know, funny note, sitting from kind of a mid-career space, you know, one of the things that I find is great in my life is that I got a chance to pick everybody on my team. So I got to pick people who I enjoy working with and who chose to work with me because they wanted to learn something. But I think that's a different perspective than what we're talking about right now.
I'm going to add to that. So I want to caveat, it's, you know, only really the first full-time for me. And I come from like, it's a mid-size, I would say. So, but it's really the direct connection. And again, also could vary with the nature of my work too, to management. And it's great to be having that opportunity because I get the direct connection with program managers, and as well as just other technical experts in maybe a specific discipline that you might not be able to get at a traditional, but again, kind of caveating, it might depend on the size of the company, and what maybe like the nature of the work is going to be. So.
Yeah, I think from the team dynamics side, I think a lot of people have said it really really makes a big difference kind of on a localized basis what that particular team is doing. I've seen teams at bigger companies who like Jay said, do function pretty much like a more nimble, fast-paced group and have a very, you know, tend to be a lot kind of closer to one another, and likewise the other way. The other thing is not just the dynamics within a team, but how different teams work with one another can have a big impact on your day-to-day kind of life. And trying to understand how different teams work with one another, I think can give you a lot of insight into how an organization works. In certain places, there's like pretty well siloed off organizations where they try to be as independent as possible, and communication between teams is kind of restricted to like, you know, high level, like manager to manager type stuff, versus other organizations where it's much more encouraged for everyone to kind of freely communicate with other teams. And so there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I think you can definitely find as you spend some time working in the positions, you'll get an idea of what you really prefer to work in and how you can be the most successful.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you specifically. I think it's kind of interesting that you work for, a company that I guess is kind of bread and butter or the parent company, the larger company, right, had a product and a technology, it was very successful in that space. And now they're trying to transition and do something that a lot of people would kind of argue is very different, right? And so I'm sure there's some dynamic there that's kind of interesting. Could you talk to that a little bit about like how that is, if there's been any growing pains with trying to evolve and add this into the business, and kind of how you have experienced that, if that's something that is happening?
Oh, absolutely. Huge growing pains, huge things. Try explain aerospace to automotive engineers, right? I think that already summarizes it, right? Like they got no clue about certification or the pain points of it, right? They got no things, things like, Del A certification of code, right? DO 178C. I mean, it's all these things that we throw around because they're our daily business. They have no understanding of that. So it's a challenge, but I think it's a lot of again, learning on both sides, right? And what we're trying to do a lot, and has been very valuable, is bring the best from both worlds together, right? And it's when you talk to automotive people, I mean, automotive really understands cost, which is something that traditionally in aerospace has really taken a backseat, right? We were always about, let's jump on the great new thing, right? But we rarely, talked about cost. And that's even, I mean, look at the aircrafts now, right? I mean, they're still in comparison like ridiculously expensive, somewhat to, even helicopters to some extent. So I think that's, on the other hand, right, you bring these aerospace technologies into the automotive world, and sometimes you realize when you do the comparison, well, the delta actually isn't that large, and why don't we, collaborate more and bring that more together? And I think one of these insights for me was when you look at, again, these safety certification levels that we have in aerospace, Del A, Del B, and then you look at the autonomous side from autonomous driving, you look at, ISO 26262, again, don't need to remember those names, but it's basically the delta actually isn't that large. It's just that people had never talked to each other, right? So they do very similar things, very much in isolation. So it's been very refreshing to some extent, bring that together. And I think that's where, we try to, drive a lot of value and try to build our competitive edge. We're definitely not the fastest moving, right? I mean, you will all see Nihar's vehicle fly definitely before ours. I mean, there's no question about that, because yes, we are a large conglomerate, in that sense, coming from automotive, so a lot of things we don't understand. But we're trying to bring this automotive mindset to the industry, and obviously doesn't go without growing pains. But I think when you master that, it can actually be something interesting and something beneficial in the end for everyone.
Sure. I'm going to put Nihar on the spot now, just because I'm going to do it. So big company, a lot of money, a lot of talent, a lot of expertise trying to get into this space. Obviously you speak for yourself and not your company, but what is the discussion that you guys think about? Like, okay, we have now all these players, right, that are trying to come into the space that we're very good at, we're continuing to be good at. How does that work, right, in your world right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is execution, right? So kind of assembling a team of people who kind of have the right skills and have the right experiences is a huge part of it. But really kind of when it comes down to it, it's really all about executing. And as far as like what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, it means kind of having a laser focus on what we're actually trying to deliver, what are the key metrics that we need to meet, and what are kind of the real things that are going to bring value to our product in the world, and just staying really focused on those things and trying to avoid all the distractions of, what are competitors doing, what are, other industries doing, just really trying to stay focused on what we're doing, how to get ourselves through like a certification process with an aircraft type that the FAA doesn't understand, kind of help them along that road. And just keep going on that without giving it to all the other. It's very tempting, right? There's so much, there's so many interesting aspects you can look at. Every day I'm coming up, my team's coming up with ideas on things that we could easily spend years researching and improving. But really figuring out when you can say, hey, this is a solution, this is good enough, and this is what we're going to deliver. Figuring out where to draw that line is pretty tough, and really a huge part of kind of where you go from directly just engineering and focusing on the technical aspects to figuring out how to deliver a product.
Let's have questions.
I'll just add a comment. It's great to see three people that I haven't seen for a while.
Yeah, good to see you, David.
Yeah, Jay, I've known for 10 or 20 years now.
Yeah, the 10 goes to 20 real quick, huh?
Yeah, and Samantha, I've known for 10. And Courtney, I think I've known you close to 5 years, 4 years now.
Yeah, great to see you.
And just in general, I echo the thoughts of the panelists. They're going through a lot of the stuff that I went through and am going through. So it's really interesting to hear. I wasn't the only one out there and trying to do new things. Yeah, for me, I was okay to date me. You talked about excitement in the aerospace industry. All right, well, so for me, today is what it was in the 1960s. So, and seeing the Apollo landings and things like that. So it's a very exciting time for the space industry. Anyway.
Awesome. Any others? Courtney, I saw you just put the link in the chat for the feedback. So for those of you, if you could, that are on, we'd love if you spend a couple minutes filling that out. That helps us kind of shape what our next sessions are going to be about for the coming years and what kind of panelists you guys want to hear from. So we would really appreciate it if you took a look at that. Courtney, I'll hand it over to you. Anything else?
No, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today and for hanging in there. I think it might be 1 a.m. for Jannis right now. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you could give us some feedback on that, we would appreciate it. Our next Illini Aero Connection session is planned for January, and we're going to be talking about teamwork and transferable knowledge and the importance of that as you're working on teams, which everybody has to. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.